4, 2.4, solving quadratic equations algebraically. Equations algebraically.
Gosh, I think we did that again.
Okay, here we go. Okay, if I have this x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. When it is set equals 0, that means it wants me to solve. It wants me to give a physical answer. How would you go about solving this? What do you need to do to solve this?
Move the X.
Nope.
Move 6.
Nope.
Combine like terms.
There is nothing that's alike.
Oh, give up.
What? Unfoil it. I'm going to factor it. I'm going to go like this and say, okay, I have an x and an x. What multiplies to give me negative 6 and adds to give me negative 1?
Too much right now.
3 and 2. Which one's negative? Which one's positive?
Negative 3, positive 2.
So then I have to take each of these units and set them equal to 0. So x equals 3, x plus 2 equals 0, x equals negative 2. My solutions are 3 and negative 2. So when you are solving algebraically, I need to see a lot of work on your paper. That should be fun for some of you. What happens if you have one that looks like this? X plus 3 squared equals 16. How do I solve for that?
You put X plus 3, X plus 3 out there.
Oh, I don't want to separate it. There's something easier I can do first. How do you get rid of a square?
Use it. Square root.
Take the square root. So let's get rid of this square by taking the square root of both sides. So you get x plus 3 equals what? What? Not just 4. When I take the square root of something, I have a positive and a negative answer. So I get plus or minus 4. From there, I subtract 3. Okay? If I subtract 3 from positive 4, I get the answer of 1. If I subtract 3 from the answer of negative 4, I get negative 7. So my solutions are 1 and negative 7. You have to be able to do it both ways. Okay? This is factoring. This is extracting the square root. Then we talked about, I know we talked about this last year, completing the square to solve for things. Okay? If you have, if you have x squared plus 6x equals 5, okay? When you want to complete the square, you want to ask yourself, what is half of 6 squared?
3. Wait.
Yeah, half of 6 is 3, then square it.
2 squared.
9.
So I get x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 5 plus 9. You have to add 9 to both sides.
Wait, can you explain how you got 9 again?
You take half of the middle number. You take whatever this term is, you divide it by 2. And then when you get 3, you square it to get this number right here. Okay. So then from there, I can start to solve. I have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 5 plus 9. And 5 plus 9 is what? 14. So I technically have this. I can break this down into x plus 3 squared equals 14. Because what goes in here is whatever this number was right there. And you have 2 sets of those. What? Yeah. So I have 2 sets of those. Now, from there, how do I solve? Take the square root.
I really don't need it.
X plus 3 equals what? Does 14 have a perfect square? No. Can I take anything out of 14? 7, 2. So no, because it doesn't have a pair. So I get plus or minus radical 14. I subtract 3 from both sides, and x equals negative 3 plus or minus radical 14. Okay, so we've done it 3 ways now. This is factoring. Okay. This one's completing the square. And the red one is considered extracting square roots. Okay, and then there's one more. And this one takes the longest, but it should be easier because you should remember this. Do you remember what the quadratic formula is?
Negative b plus or minus something.
Yep. It's the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of
Squared.
of what?
B squared.
B
plus
squared.
4ac.
Yep, minus 4ac all over
2a.
2a. I use the quadratic formula when those other 3 aren't possible. Okay? When I cannot factor it, when I cannot extract the square root, when I cannot solve it by completing the square, I can use the quadratic formula. Okay? So an example would be 2x squared plus 3x minus 1 equals 0. Okay? If technically I can solve this one by completing the square, but do I want to take half of 3?
That's
Because it-
4xc.
Is what?
That's 4xc. What does it say up there?
4ac.
4ac, sorry. Okay, I don't want to take half of 3 because that gives me a fraction or a decimal, and that just becomes messy. So it would be easier to plug this into the quadratic formula than to take half of that and try to complete the square. So if I set this up, this is your A, this is your B, this is your C. So I take the opposite of B, so negative 3, plus or minus the square root of 3 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 1 all over 2 times 2. Okay. So negative 3 plus or minus 3 squared is 9. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 1 is positive 8. All over 4. 9 plus 8 is 17, right? So your final solution and you have 2 answers there. You have negative 3 plus radical 17 divided by 4, and you have negative 3 minus radical 17 divided by 4. Okay? So there are 4 ways we can go about solving something. Let's just do a couple, and then we'll do some homework. What happens if I have this? 6x squared equals 3x. Okay, how would you solve that?
Divide by 3x.
Divide by what?
3x.
If I do that, I get 0. I can't solve it that way. You want to get everything to one side. So subtract 3x because you want it to be set equal to 0. Okay, so that you can solve. Now, can I factor things out of here? What can you factor out? A 3x. If I factor out a 3x, I then have 2x minus 1 equals 0. Now what do I do to solve? Nope, I just undistributed on purpose. So I'm going to take this unit and set it equal to 0. I'm going to take this unit and set it equal to 0. So when I divide by 3, x gives me 0. When I add 1, I get 2x equals 1. Divide by 2 and x equals 1/2. So my answer is 0 or 1/2. Okay, so I have two possible solutions in that case. Let's try this one. 9x squared minus 6x equals 1. What do I need to do first? Oh no, equals -1. What do you need to do first? Add 1 to both sides. I want to get everything on one side. So I have 9x squared minus 6x plus 1 equals 0. Okay. So what multiplies, this is actually a special type of equation. 9 is what type of number?
Square, right?
A square, a perfect square. Is 1 a perfect square?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
So if you take the square root of 9, which is 3, and you take the square root of 1, which is 1, okay, and put the minus sign in between them, you have your factored out version of that. I don't have to spend time doing it. If the first and last are perfect squares, you have a perfect square trinomial going on. When you have a perfect square trinomial, you can then just take whatever the square root of this is and plug it here, and whatever the square root of this is and plug it here, and this sign is whatever's in the middle. Now that's set equal to 0. Now I have to solve. So I take the square root of those. Add 1. Divide by 3. X equals 1/3. Okay. Let's look at a few more. Tell me about this. What happens if I have 4x squared equals 12? How do I solve that? Divide by 4. You get x squared equals 3. Now what?
Square root.
Take the square root. So x equals plus or minus radical 3.
Think so.
Okay, x minus 3 squared equals 7. How do you solve that one? What do you need to do?
Resquare both sides.
You do what?
Resquare.
Not square. No.
You put the radical out.
Yes, I want to extract the square root. I want to take the radical of it so that the squares cancel out. So then you get x minus 3 equals plus or minus radical 7. I add 3 to both sides, and I get x equals 3 plus or minus radical 7, extracting the square root. Okay? The only time I want to move stuff is if I have something where I just have x's going on. I need to move it so that's set equal to 0. I need to move it if it would make a trinomial, like 9x, 6x, and 1, or 2x squared, or 4x, and 3, whatever. Okay. Let's see here. What about this one? 2x minus 1 squared equals -9. What do I do there first? Okay, take the square root. What is the square root of -9?
-3.
No. If I have a
Positive
negative
three.
inside of a radical,
It
what
can't
do
be.
I have to represent it with?
An I.
An I. So you have plus or minus 3i. Okay, I take the normal square root of 9, which is 3. The I represents the negative, plus or minus, because there's two answers. Add 1 to both sides. You get 2x equals 1 plus or minus 3i. divide by 2, x equals 1 plus or minus 3I over 2. There's my solution. Okay, we'll stop here tonight, and these will be the things that are on your homework.